On the Reflection Podcast today, returning guest Greg Seltz, who's the director of the Lutheran Center for Religious Liberty in Washington, D.C. Last time I talked with Greg, it was about 6 months before the 2024 election, and we talked about a lot of things that actually changed within weeks of that recording. Now we're back, and it's a couple weeks after a new president has been inaugurated, and Greg is back to talk about what it is that we do now as Christians in this world in a new presidential administration now, and how some things have changed, some things not so much, and what we do now. And that's on this episode of the Reflection Podcast. In the pastor's office with me once again. Thanks for coming back, Greg. I really appreciate it.
Pleasure. Great to be here with you, Dad.
We've done this a couple different times. The last time you and I were together was it was a couple months, June, July, August, September, October, 6 months before the election last year.
Right.
In fact, I think you and I had a conversation about 2 weeks before President Biden dropped out of the race. And we had talked about that, but it was still a great conversation. I invite people to go back and listen to that on the election and how Christians can participate in the national election that took place in November. What today we want to talk about is that election.
Okay.
And I wanted to go and just get some of your thoughts and have a conversation about the inaugural address of President Trump. And then the next day, when he went to a national prayer service in the National Cathedral, just touch on that a little bit. And then talk about being a Christian in the country today, as opposed to being a Christian in the country in the past. And has anything changed, and has nothing changed? And obviously, as a Christian pastor, we have this overriding theology, this overriding belief that Jesus never changes. He is the same yesterday, today, and forever, and has been for 2,000 years since his birth, but of course, since the beginning of time, and how that affects what we're doing today in the United States in the 21st century. So let's
let me start with that, since you kind of brought in a lot of thoughts there. Actually, the American experiment is a reflection. I just read a book it's called America Betrayed, and David Horowitz. And the first 3 chapters are on Martin Luther.
Wow.
And he gets Martin Luther right. And he says Martin Luther was the forerunner of America.
Yes.
And so insofar as differentiating the work of the church, the work of the state, and kind of any utopian notions. And now this guy is not a Christian. I think he's even an atheist, but he's a conservative. And I've never heard anyone get at least Luther right. What pains me to believe is that he doesn't necessarily believe in Jesus as his savior. But here's the point, is that all the scripture, God is actually, you're exactly right. He doesn't change. He made a promise to save the world, and he put that promise into people, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and the kingdom of David, and he brought that kingdom to fruition in the person and work of Jesus. Jesus is born in the town of David, and he is Christ the Lord. Okay. So all those prophecies come to fruition in Jesus. And then the New Testament differentiates the theocracies stuff of the Old Testament, which is only in Israel, into, give to Caesar what is Caesar's, give to God what is God's. Because God's got to preserve the world so that sinful world doesn't destroy itself, so they can hear about how he has saved it in Jesus. Lutherans properly differentiate, although our own people don't understand it, God's preserving work through even Caesar, who, by the way, wasn't a Christian. He just was doing what God said, which is keep all hell from breaking loose, use the sword properly, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And that's all we look for Caesar to do today. And we would say the government's, some kind of reflection of that today. But the person and work of Jesus then in his church proclaiming the good news of the gospel. So differentiate. Well, my work in Washington is dealing with the Caesar stuff and the preserving work of God, which doesn't save, but it keeps all hell from breaking loose. So we start asking the question, And by the way, the founding fathers then limited Caesar's work. That was the unique experiment, and set free the faith-driven, and they were all Christians, faith-driven, morally directed, self-governing citizens. And not all of them were Orthodox Christians. I get that, but that was their ideal. They said if that person, motivated by the faith, self-governing, directed by biblical morality, lives that kind of free life in service to their neighbor, we don't need much government. That's it, folks.
Yeah,
that's it.
Limited government is a standard that it's really a political. It's part of a political ideology. A conservative or constitutional conservative is the government should be limited, and I think you can make a case the founders believe that in this country.
Yeah. Oh yeah,
and they got that a lot of it from Luther, as you said. I had recorded a conversation, a two-part conversation. It ended up almost being an hour and 40 minutes with a Luther scholar to talk about how the United States benefited from Luther's work in the 16th century. And it truly is. There wouldn't be a USA, there wouldn't be a West really without Luther.
Yeah, the West started the breakup. Yeah, the West started the breakup with the monarchy, the limiting of the monarchy. But my point is it's hard data. See, a lot of times people say, well, where did you get that? Did you get that from some Christian nationalist group? Man, David Horowitz is not a Christian nationalist, okay? And when he literally does the first 3 chapters on Martin Luther and how a monk actually paved the way for the freedoms you have today, all I'm saying is, it's just that we, like anything else, my work on the Hill is what mitigates human sinfulness better. That's the answer to my work. It's not what's the best biblical view of government. No, it's what government mitigates the sinfulness of humanity better than the other version of government. And the other thing that the founders were unique on, they all believed in the depravity of humanity. Show me how an American exceptionalist is going to say we're all sinful people. I mean, that's the French Revolution. They're all saying we're perfect human beings. We're rising to utopia. The founders said no, we're all broken, and so we got to limit power in the hands of sinful people. So again, they gave us this, which gives us freedom. So all I'm doing on the Hill is fighting to maintain that freedom, so that the church can be the church. What troubles me today is there are people in our midst who think, well, we don't have a right to fight for that freedom. And I finally got another way of saying it. Daniel was in the lion's den, and God miraculously shut the mouth of the lions, which were just the government kind of saying, this is what we do to people we don't like. I'm saying that we have a miracle like Daniel in the lion's den. It's called the First Amendment. And it's the government's teeth have been tied shut to law-abiding citizens, and they're turned properly on the bad guys, bad actors in our culture. And that's the role of government. And I'm just fighting to maintain that. And that's not an ultimate thing. That's just in service to the church, so we can freely proclaim the whole counsel of God for people to believe. That's what we do in D.C., and I don't look for anything more than that. This new administration, as you're probably going to point out, is, some people are putting kind of messianic tones on it. I don't think he is, because look at what he does. He's giving authority back to the average people. If that's what he's doing, that's what I want any government to do. And I really don't know whether some of these other people on the other side of the aisle are good people or bad people. I just look at what they do and then say that was what government shouldn't do, or that's what government should do.
Yeah, Jesus said that evil doesn't like light shined on it.
Right.
And I think that, in a way, that's what we're seeing now, is just open the books.
Yeah.
Open it up and let's see what's been going on. And that's the first thing that the new administration did. I mean, I read somewhere that this new administration has done more in 17 days than any other president has done in their first term in office, their 4 years. And
what people need to understand is that a lot of his executive orders, because again, I was a casual follower of politics before I came here. A lot of his executive orders are merely overturning the executive orders of Obama and Biden. And again, what did those executive orders of Obama and Biden do? They created this slush fund called USAID. They created it. I thought that was an agency that was created by Congress. No, that was declared by an executive order, and then they siphoned taxpayer money into these things. And Trump didn't. Trump did. He's gotten a lot smarter. He didn't just say, "Well, that's an executive order created. Executive order gets rid of it." No, he moved it underneath um, uh, our buddy in Florida. It just popped out of my head. The new Secretary of State. But he moved it underneath him and said, deal with that, because he knew legally there would be some pushback. But my point was, folks, you can't just create an agency and then start siphoning our money into it without us knowing what's going on. And now he's shining lights on that. I don't know, all the things that are going on with all those things, but I'm looking for government to do less and church to do more. I don't understand why any of our people would be upset by that.
Yeah, the history of our particular church body, Lutheran Church Missouri Synod, was that we did a lot of the things that government is now doing and taking
Right.
over,
Hospitals.
helping widows and orphans,
Right.
basically.
Right.
Orphanages, hospitals,
Right.
the places you would go to if you needed mental health breaks. They used to call them sanatoriums, but
Right.
these were all entities of the church. The church took care of that, and somewhere along the way, the church abdicated, and the government took it over, or the government took it over, and the church said, "Oh well, let's go and do this." I don't. That would
I think
make
it's
a great dissertation for somebody to find out
Well,
exactly where that happened.
I think it's a bit nefarious too, because like even with certifications and licensing and accreditation, you look what's happening to a lot of our counselors, a lot of our lawyers, our doctors, they have a way of moving you where they want to move you, and the next thing you know, they're doing your work and you're doing what you're told. And so I'm pretty sure, because I've dealt with a lot of things in the adoption foster care on the Hill, and once the state regulates you, and that's what, it's, well, the state's got to regulate it, or those church people could really do bad things to people. That's kind of the argument out in the public square. Well, next thing you find out is, if you don't believe in marriage between a man and a man, or if you don't believe that there's more than two genders, they kick you out of the foster care adoption. And they literally were doing that in Pennsylvania. That was one of the first things I got involved in. They came in and they were going to just dump all these foster care kids back into the system and tear them out of the homes of all these people who are doing such great work. And the Catholic Charities have been doing this for 150 years. And I kept saying to people, we got to stop this. And our people are like, well, it's not as bad as you're saying. I'm saying it's everywhere, and they're pushing Christians out. And then our pastors sometimes then go chastise people and say, we need to do more. And I'm going, we just got pushed out, my friend. So, President Trump signed an order yesterday that none of this kind of behind the scenes persecution of just treating Christians differently than everybody else, it will not happen anymore in the federal government. And again, if you knew how pervasive this kind of thing was in all these different disciplines, that's a good thing that it can't be done anymore.
Yeah, just my personal feeling, government, get out of the way.
Yeah.
Let us do what we have been called to do. You have been called to do something. I'm not saying the government should go away completely.
Well,
God has biblically called you.
Romans 13, yeah.
Yeah, but not this, okay? The church is called to do this. Take care of, like James said, widows and orphans. That was, Acts. The apostles were saying, hey, we need a group of guys that are going to take care of the food distribution, literally. And we're still doing that, and we need to continue to do that. Let's go back to, it seems like years ago already, but it was actually only, 3 weeks ago, this Monday. When this show drops on Monday, it'll be 3 weeks since the inauguration.
Okay.
President Trump spoke, 20 minutes maybe?
He did a lot of things that day, though.
He did, but the speech he made at the beginning, the inaugural address, which every president pretty much does that. I listened to it again this morning, and God gets a mention, but it's certainly not a Christian address. You cannot in any way, shape, or form say President Trump is this Christian nationalist and he's setting up a Christian nation.
Yeah.
He doesn't mention Jesus one bit. He did make the case that he feels that God spared him from an assassin's bullet for a reason. And I can appreciate that. We're all called by God to do something, and God does protect us. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah, well, I mean, Christian nationalism. I'm just so tired of the discussion because we're again, and I'm speaking to those who are listening. The charge that conservatives are Christian nationalists. I don't see any of that on the Hill. Okay, and that would be that they want to legislate the faith of believers by coercing the government to make people Christian. That's Christian nationalism.
Right.
It's not happening. Most people on the Hill, especially conservatives, apologize when they say in the name of Jesus, but they say, but I have to be true to myself. I'm saying that's the difference between morality. The morality of the scripture is for all people. The faith of the scripture is a gift of God to anyone who believes. The Lutherans, again, properly differentiate the moral role God's word in the world, and then government has a moral responsibility. And that's what most people call religion. As I've said before many, many times, Christianity is not a religion. It's a proclamation of freedom that comes because of what God has done, and the government has nothing to do with it. So when I listen to Trump's speech, the one thing that you didn't hear is that he says I'm a messiah figure and the world's going to change and I'm going to bring utopia and it's all going to happen because of what I do. I heard that in Obama's speech. I heard that in Biden's speech. They literally said the government is going to create, this new thing. I mean, seas were going to stop rising and, but all these things were going to change. And I said, you're going to do that through the power of government? No. And even the things that I fought with in my urban ministry, racial issues and all these kind of things, that's going to come when we start to do our work in the world, change people's hearts, empower people. That is even beyond government scope. Government scope is to use the sword and to make sure the bad actors don't control our neighborhoods. That's its main role. The rest of it's on us. And what Trump is basically saying or doing, I say I shouldn't say don't listen to what he says, but watch what he does. Just like I watch what Biden did, I watch what Obama did, I watch what they do, what their platform does. Trump's platform gave us constitutional judges, which got rid of Roe v. Wade. I watch what his executive orders do. They're giving power back to average American people, protecting neighborhoods, and that's all ethnicities. He's not targeting anybody by their race. He's targeting them by their behavior. And so when you look at these things, you're saying, is that what government's supposed to do? And as one who's lived in the neighborhoods, a lot of the neighborhoods that are under siege, Representative Cuellar just posted something, and he's on the border in Texas. He's the only conservative pro-life Democrat left. And he said, we don't want sanctuary cities on the border. We want law and order. My people need law and order. And again, now justice, equity for all people, justice is blind and treated the same. Yes. But that's Cuellar talking about if you live here, you want a safe neighborhood. You want your kids to be able to walk to school. You want to be able to go to church. That's government's role. So you and I both know that if we start to mix and start to say government's supposed to benevolence, I say that's bad government, worse church. And when you hear it in a preacher's voice, it's a terrible sermon.
Let's talk about that sermon that was the next day at the National Cathedral just
Yeah.
a little. I just want to touch on it. I actually brought it up in a weekend message here at my church where I serve as a pastor. I preached on this a little bit. Because the overall message was about the sermon itself and in worship. And I listened to it. I listened to it as it happened that day. And I deliberately put aside my political leanings, my political bias as much as I could, and just listened to what that preacher was saying. And she said at the end of it, please be merciful. Please show mercy and compassion. I forget the exact reference or the phrases that she used. And I was thinking to myself, I can't argue with that. Of course, I'm going to show mercy and compassion and to help other people. But everything that she said up to that point, one of the things, it just jumped out at me. Jesus said, this is what she said. Jesus said that freedom is the solid rock on which to build a nation. And I looked in my Bible.
I don't see that
I couldn't
anywhere.
find that,
Well, she's a liberation theologian. So, again, and when people hear this stuff, they're going, oh, that sounds so wonderful. But remember, she uses all our terminology and she means exactly the opposite by it. Everything is political to her. She also gets millions of dollars from the government. I don't know if, did you know that?
I found that out
Yeah, she
afterwards.
gets millions of dollars from the
Millions and
government,
millions of dollars.
and she doesn't. I don't think she makes a lot of calls on her constituency. I don't think she makes. I don't think she does the things that we do, which is preach, teach, go visit the poor, go to. She's a shill, and she gets paid by government to do lots of different government things. But my point is, when you listen to a sermon on minimum wage, or you listen to a sermon on health care, and you listen to these things, and I was in New York, and I served in places where I heard these sermons all the time. The left, the liberation theologian churches preach this all the time. Politicians are in their pulpits all the time. Nobody ever said that's Christian nationalism. See, that is Christian nationalism.
Yeah.
Or I call it secular, progressive Christian nationalism.
Right.
But that's merging the church and state. That's politicizing the gospel. And most liberation theologians will say, if the gospel is not political, you're not preaching the gospel. Here comes Lutherans and say, no, we're differentiating the gospel from politics. We're talking about good politics can't save us, but bad politics can destroy us. I'm blocking bad politics so I can preach the gospel. What she said at the very end, be merciful. The government's role is to be just. Now, in a just way, I'm not saying you don't have to be a jerk, but that's the assumption that if you say no as a policeman and say, well, I stopped you and I have to actually do this and I have to give you a ticket. Well, be merciful. No, I have to give you a ticket. Well, now you're not merciful. No, and I'm just doing what I'm called to do. Mercy's something. Now you go home and you can talk to your family and say, how do I get through this? They're the ones who are the merciful ones. They're the ones who surround you with prayer and care. Go to your church. But to suddenly say that the government's supposed to be the merciful deliverer of the good news of the gospel, that is so heretical, I can't even tell you. It's bad gospel. It's not the gospel at all. It's political. And it's it's not the message of forgiveness of sins by grace through faith in Jesus. And it's bad government too, because once the government starts taxing you to be merciful, it's not charity.
Yeah, legislating morality doesn't usually work.
Well, I mean, when you legislate, I mean, look, all legislation is morality. So we're finally saying, what's the government's role in regulating the outward behavior of us in certain ways? Right. And that's why we limit its role, because it's got power. So I'll give you another example. Defund the police. I used to say this all the time. Defund the police. If you defund the police and destroy the family, you destroy the neighborhood. But I don't want 100 policemen in my neighborhood either. I'm with a lot of the folks on the Hill. So I said, so we have to either have strong families, incentivize that, and then we need less police. Or if you disincentivize family, you're going to need more police. But if you disincentivize the family and disincentivize the police with your policy, you're going to destroy the neighborhood.
Yep.
And so you're using biblical wisdom to say, what's their role? What's our role? And now what's good policy? But that's just laying a foundation of civility. It's not solving the problems. And too many Christians want the government to solve the problems. It can't do it.
They can't. No.
Can't.
And the government it can't do it because it's not called to do it. The
Correct.
church is called to bring the solution to sin, which is one person, Jesus Christ.
Right.
In this message, what I caught was that the thrust of it was, well, Jesus showed mercy. Jesus was our example. Mm-hmm. But what did Jesus say? I picked it up in two places in the Gospel of John, John 5, John 8. Now, John 8, it's going to be a little hinky there because of the footnote. But John 5 is very clearly the words of Jesus in that context. Jesus deals with people with compassion, with mercy. And then what does he tell them? He says, sin no more. That's the key.
But that's Jesus doing it. He's not. I want to know where Jesus says to Pilate, do this. I want to know where he says to Caesar, do this. He doesn't say that. He says, you do this. And Matthew 25 is the most, and secular progressives always go to this when they talk about government. See, Nancy Pelosi said, we're the Matthew 25 constituency caucus. I said, what? And it was all, I said, so you're doing Jesus' work on the Hill? Yeah, when she passed that legislation. I said, that's Christian nationalism right there. That's what it is. That's merging church and state. No one complained at all on the Hill about it. And everyone said that. But I just said, there's Larry Elder produced a couple of videos called Uncle Tom and Uncle Tom 2. And a lot of people in the city have been told this notion that the government's job is to benevolence you. And what it does is it actually disempowers you and actually keeps you in poverty, and it destroys the family. And he's been fighting us. So they made this movie, and a lot of people, it was that Matthew 25 passage. They said, wait a minute, that's to me, that's not the government. That's to me as a person, not to government as an entity. In fact, the government is not in the benevolence business. That's not the biblical notion of government. Well, once you merge that, I've even worked with people in Skid Row. One of the people that was working in Skid Row, he said, we've got so many people ready to help these folks, okay? But the problem is we've got to get them, they still got to take some kind of action for their life. They either have to come to our beds, they have to come to our showers, come to our food, but we've got enough food, enough beds, enough everything. And then here come people from the suburbs, and they throw clothing and water into the mix. And what happens is they destroy our ability to get them to take responsibility for any level of their life. Next thing you know, they're selling that stuff to each other out there, and they don't come to our places, and they actually complicate our ability to help them. And that's my problem with people who think they're doing a merciful thing, but they don't watch what they actually did to the people, or did to the people that were there actually helping them. And since I worked in New York and LA and dealt with these things, that's what I found. I had to know whether the people I was dealing with needed my help, or whether they were shucking and jiving on the street. And again, benevolence is one of those things that if you don't walk all the way with somebody, I think you muck it up. And especially if you think the government's supposed to do it in your place, it's just not going to work.
Jesus, in two places, talked about showing mercy. The healing of the 10 lepers. When he does that, what does he tell them to do then? To go show themselves to the priests.
Right.
Okay. Basically follow the law then. Okay. At that time,
yeah,
be a part of it. And then when he heals the demoniac at the Gerasenes, and that guy wants to follow him, then, here's my savior. I want to be with him. And Jesus tells, no, go back home. Go back into the community.
Get back into and be the human being you're called to be. I thought you were going to go to the Good Samaritan, because that's the one that gets thrown at me all the time here. And I say, well, if you read the whole story, he does help the person in need, doesn't ask whether he's a legitimate this or legitimate that. I got no problem with that. But then he literally takes him to the people that can help him, and he pays for it. And he says, I'll come back, and if there's any other cost, I will pay for it. So I said the same thing when you're dealing with the people rushing the border. And I've got people who live on the border in Texas and things like that, and constantly coming over. And so the question is, if you help, will you help all the way? And what people say is, I'm going to help to this point, and then if they, the rest of it's up to them. So again, when you look at all these things, Christians, I think, here's what the accusation is going to be made of our conversation. Oh, you're giving people permission not to care. No, I'm saying it's not the government's responsibility to care. It's your responsibility. It's my responsibility. And that best care starts in our neighborhoods. It starts in our communities. It starts in our cities. And the founders thought, if we do that, it's going to be better than anything a big federal government can do for everybody. In fact, in the Defund the Police, I said one of the things that they were trying to do is federalize the police force. People don't realize this. See, I see this stuff every day. When you federalize the police force, that means suddenly they're going to send people from D.C. to your house. Mm-hmm. Not the local police that you voted for and the local laws you voted for and the badge that you said they're supposed to protect. And if they don't protect it, you can get rid of that policeman and get another one. That's the American way. No, they were going to strip all of that out, and they were going to give police forcing federal power. Well, that means a guy can be in your neighborhood from the federales. And if you've ever been to Mexico, you don't want federales coming to your house. And so I just look at this and say, why don't people get this? It's not a perfect system, and I'm not looking for the government to solve any problems. But if it does its job, my neighborhood can be civil and peaceful, and then it's my job to be the better neighbor to my neighbors.
I want to get into the immigration issues because they're right here. It's so prevalent, and especially this week, it's come out. Because of all the things that are going on from Washington, D.C. But it's interesting what you were saying sparked this idea of the abortion argument, that Christians are attacked for being pro-life. It's like you're just the accusation is you're only interested in stopping the abortion. And
Okay.
that's not true at all. We are
Not true,
not
but it's
just,
not a bad thing.
no, no, no. And there's nothing wrong with
I
stopping
mean,
the
they're killing
abortion,
a
but we
baby.
also are looking after the baby
Yeah.
is born,
Oh
helping
yeah.
mother
Oh.
and baby get on their feet, bringing
Hey,
the
listen,
father back into it.
my wife and I we were pro-life people on the streets of New York City. We worked with Cardinal O'Connor, and basically our thing was if someone came in and would bring the baby to term, we paid for everything. And even if they wanted to keep the child, we paid for everything. And we were there. But what people don't understand is we've created a notion that I have a right to kill this baby. I have that right. And all this safe, legal, and rare nonsense. They lied to you, folks. They lied to you. They want abortion even after the fact. And you talked about pro-life people being kind of persecuted. No, they're being put in jail. There's a 75-year-old woman in jail right now because she was protesting a clinic where they found bags of late-term abortion kids fully formed in garbage bags. If you're not throwing up by what I'm saying, I'm sorry for you because they found that. And so did any of those doctors go to jail? None of those doctors went to jail. 5 of those protesters are in federal prison. One of them's a 75-year-old woman. If you think that's equity and justice, I don't know what to tell you. And so what I'm saying is there's a sense where our country is coming back to a mean. I don't know what that level is, but pro-life, pro-family, pro-things that all of us can celebrate. There's even atheists for life, by the way, folks. I work with them on the Hill. They're on our side. But that's not God's saving work. That's God's preserving work. And I want people who have a sense of humanity and dignity to each other. Can I jump in on something about immigration?
Absolutely.
I got involved in this early on, and the accusations that are flying on the Hill, folks, just remember where these accusations come from. The data will come out. But it's interesting, when I was in one of the meetings and I had people on both sides, the meeting was crazy. This is back 6 years ago now. And I was on the panel. So I was one of the guys that was supposed to talk about what's the church's role in immigration. And finally, at the end, one of these staffers got up, and there were senators and congressmen, everybody was in there, and they said, this is tearing our nation apart. He said, what can we do? And before I could get up and say anything, the rabbi on our panel jumped up and said, if we would start teaching, start with the premise that we're all made in the image of God, and we start with that level of understanding, but then hold people accountable who defy that, like a criminal defies that notion by treating someone else as less than, then we could at least start to make some headway. Now, I always ask people, what do you think? How do you think that room responded? It was a very, very political room. And everybody says, oh, they probably, they're mentioning God again. They're mentioning God. Standing ovation, all sides of the room. That's my problem with our people. We listen to the people who are using our virtues against us, saying, well, the government should be benevolent. Well, those are the same people who want to destroy the church in other aspects. I don't listen to their accusations. I look at the policy, try to make sure it's equitably. And when I say this, justice should be equitably applied, but there's no such thing as an equitable outcome for people's lives. I mean, that's another discussion. That's socialism. But when I look for this, we're the people who have the principles that will allow us to have a just society, and then freedom unleashed can bring you the kind of life that only God can bring by grace through faith. That's what we're fighting for on the Hill. We differentiate that, and then we hold the government accountable.
The one thing about immigration that I actually have a personal experience with this. In a previous congregation, we had it was it was actually Midwest transplants to where I was serving in California. So it's mostly Midwestern people, second generation. But we also had attached to us a group of about 100, 150 immigrants from Indonesia that lived in Southern California, and they were Lutherans. And they actually called a pastor from Indonesia, and he went to our seminary, my alma mater, on a student visa. And he graduated, and we called him to be our pastor, specifically to our Indonesians members. They were members of our congregation. Unfortunately, he did not change over his status. He was still in the country on a student visa, but was no longer a student. Well, this is in 2008. The government came knocking and said, "You can't do that. It's a crime. It's against the law. You're gonna and the window had closed on that, and so he got deported. He
I
was.
think I was the guy that came in and filled your pulpit
I
with
think
Peace
you.
on Sinambela and Tambatua Nabahu. You
Yep.
know, and you're right. So, I mean, I had guys who were all green card guys too, and we had to move them through the immigration process. And I had one guy that took 10 years to go through his immigration process. So you and I have experience
Yes.
in this in a real way, and we know the difference between legal and illegal immigration. We
Right.
understand that, and we understand that it's not a perfect system because in that sense, you know, he probably didn't realize, well, I got to take care of this, you
Right.
know, or maybe he did. I don't know. But again, go ahead, finish your point
Yeah,
then.
I don't think it was nefarious on his part. I think it was
Right.
more just innocent ignorance. But he was deported. He went back to Indonesia, and then I have the FBI in my office
Yeah. I
interviewing me
remember that.
because we want to bring him back. And
Right.
he's going to go through the process. And so there is where this is the government not being benevolent, not being
Oh,
merciful,
this the
but being
rules.
just and
Right.
going through the process according to the laws of the land. And he's back. He's now a in the country legally. I don't. I think he may even be a citizen now. I don't know. Because I'm no longer at that church and moved
Well,
on.
let
But
me say the same kind of thing because
yeah,
I had a friend who's very gifted. He became a pastor. He's now a Lutheran pastor in Los Angeles. He's also one of the most highly sought out city planners, engineers, architects in our country. And by quirk of fate, his father died before he finally, because his brother got in and became a citizen. He did not. He's from Argentina. And so it took him 10 years to become a citizen. And he was in my pastoral practice. He was actually headhunted by Spain. He's one of the most gifted guys. We would have loved to have him in America. And he said to me, because he finally got his citizenship 10, 12 years later, he said, Pastor, he said, if I would have just walked across the border, they would have paid for all this for me. It cost me hundreds of thousands of dollars to do this, but I knew I had to do it the right way. And I looked at that and I said, so that's a guy that we should have found a different way to bring him in. He's just that kind of person. He's been a real blessing in LA. He's been a real blessing in his work and also with the church. But like you said, that's the rules. And what bothers me is even in the immigration issue, people think we're somehow a stingy country. We bring in over 1.5 million immigrants a year. Nobody in the whole world altogether brings in that many people. That's a city every year coming into our country legally. Okay. And so for someone to say you're not a nice person, you don't care about people, blah, 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 that's just not factually true. Because when I found out those numbers, I was shocked. And these are the numbers I was dealing with in that meeting. But then when we bring in another 2, 3, 4, 5 million people, 16, 17, 18, and we have no idea. And we've got all the issues. Phoenix right now is the kidnap capital, second city in the world. Mexico City, where they do kidnappings as a way of making money. Phoenix does the same thing. Why? Because we're that close to the border, and some of that's seeping in to our culture. So as you look at these kind of things, you're like, no, we got to do better than that, and we can't incentivize people doing the wrong thing. And that's where we're at right now. But like you just said, I had some guys who got through skate free, and we worked hard on that. Then other guys, the system hit them in a certain way, and they didn't have the signature at the right time, and it took another 10 years. And yeah, that's I have empathy, and we worked hard to work with all the people that we
right.
could. There's no doubt. And if the church is doing that, I think there's nothing wrong with that.
No, it's working within the rules established, and that's the way I think it works. That God will bless that as we go through that. I just want to once again. We've talked about this before. The kingdom on the left, the kingdom on the right. I think it's worth revisiting that subject again. I think you have a unique perspective on how to convey that to people. So every time I get you on, I want you to talk about it.
I just say, first of all, it's God at work. I try to make sure I'm just trying to be faithful to whatever he tells me to do. And sometimes I don't even see exactly how things are supposed to work out, but he works 2 different ways, not us, he works to preserve the world, and he works to save the world. You don't want to say church state and all that kind of, it's not that easy, but in his preserving work, I would say his fundamental structure is not the government. His fundamental structure in his preserving work is the family.
Yes.
And Luther argued, all authority is first familial. and paternal. And that's why the feminist, attack on masculinity is so destructive, because once you obliterate the family, then the government is the only thing left. But you don't want them to be your mama and your daddy. And that's where we are in a lot of politics today in urban America. Look what it's doing to us. So when you differentiate God's preserving and saving work, you also find out that God can work through sinful non-believers in his preserving work. And so when I got involved in things, I used to teach this thing called Reformation Restraint Seeking Justice. You jump into a city issue, don't go in there like you're the savior to the culture because Jesus sent you in. Go in there and see how God is preserving the work, preserving the neighborhood, even through non-believers, even through good families. If you have strong families in neighborhoods today, that you don't even need a lot of other things. That's the problem. If there's a man in the neighborhood, they say, it can transform that neighborhood. So go in, see what God is already doing with restraint, and then start to seek justice. But then realize that's his preserving work. He's not going to save through government. He's not going to save through coercive law, gospel, preserving, saving. You start to differentiate law, gospel, differentiate God's preserving and saving work, left-hand kingdom, right-hand kingdom, and then ask the right questions of what you're looking for. I think you'll be a better, useful person in the mix. Too many people are going in with the benevolence heart of God into the preserving work of state. That's the real problem. And a lot of Christians are the ones that are mucking that up. And they're actually, like I said, when I told you about that policeman, he said, they're making my job harder here in Skid Row. And they left thinking, I just did a good thing. I gave all this stuff to the poor. I gave all this stuff. They went home feeling great. He came in and had to clean it all up. And so again, you need to understand, go talk to that policeman, say how is he preserving that? How is he drawing people into a ministry that can actually make them human again, so that they can become the human beings and take responsibility and start to even be the people that God wants them to be. Ask how he's doing that before you go in and dump a bag.
How can we do that? How can we do that then?
Well, okay, I'll tell you how I did it when I was in New York. I had two people in my church who were from the Bowery. So they were homeless people, wanted to join my church. They got clean. They came to faith, and so the first thing I did is anytime I dealt with people on the street, I would ask those guys, is he legit or not? Am I getting scammed or not? Because, the guy that comes and says, oh, Pastor, I'm really I just need a little help. And you give him the help, and then he goes around the corner and he's shooting dice or he's buying drugs or whatever, going and getting liquor. And so they were clear. That guy, I used to say it this way, I will give you the shirt off my back, but I will not let you steal Jesus' money. So they would help me because they knew the guys on the street better than I did. So get some wisdom, first of all. Second thing is get involved. So I got involved. I started to, guys that were kind of on the fence, I hired a couple guys to work with me on the church. But what I found out was one of them was a guy that was abusing the privilege. And I had I know it's probably going too long, but I had a preschool in the basement, and one day he comes and says, Pastor, I got all my stuff here. Can you just hold on to it for a minute? He brought in like 40 garbage bags of stuff into my church. And I said, what? No, you can't. I mean, I'm going to get shut down by the health department. You got to get rid of it. Oh, please help. I'm just going to leave it for a few days. Well, I left it for a few days, and I finally said, I'm putting it out on the curb. It's going to be taken by the garbage man, and if you don't do something. Here's what that guy did to me. I was in Bible study. A white guy comes in off the street, and he comes in. He says, hey, Pastor. I walk over because we're doing Bible study. I said, hey, would you like to join us? He said, oh, no, I've heard a lot of great things about your church and everything, blah, 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 blah. He goes, and so I said, well, come with the Bible study. No, I got to leave. He said, but before he left, he turned and says, why aren't you helping Billy out? What? Who are you? So Billy had been, going on the street saying this pastor's being a jerk to me, blah, blah, blah. He's going to throw all my stuff out on the street. And so Billy came in and started, or this guy came in and started, for Billy and saying, and then when I said, no, I've been working with Billy. Just if that's what you're coming in here to do, get out of here. And then he started cursing at me. And then I stopped him. I said, hey, guess what? Where do you live? He goes, well, I live, on Staten Island. I said, oh, good, because you probably got a garage, right? Yeah, I'm going to get a cab, and I'm going to put it all in there, and I'm going to drive it out. I'll pay for everything, and we'll dump it in your garage. You going to help me out? But again, you get involved, and you start to you even have to differentiate folks on the street, those who need help, those who are actually just wanting to run the streets on their own terms. If you're going to get involved, that's what you got to do.
Yeah.
And I'm just saying there's lots of people even trying to do that too. Let's empower those folks. And the last thing I need is a government bureaucrat to come in and say, we'll do it for you.
Right. It's the local, like you said, being involved in being wise is, in the wisdom is to know the people and to verify, and also the local law enforcement.
Yeah.
That's what the beauty of having local law enforcement. They know because they're dealing with it every single day. And I'm thankful that in my place where I am, I have a great relationship. We have a great relationship with our local law enforcement agencies that we can work with each other and help.
And my wife did this too, because we were in Hell's Kitchen in New York, and so we had a Girl Scout troop. One of the first things she did, she took them to all the police precincts. Because my daughter's the only white girl, and even though, well, she's actually Hispanic too, but all the other girls were of various different shades of brown. So we went, because a lot of times those neighborhoods fear the police.
Right.
So what we did is we went and my wife got to know all the police and the next thing you know, they were like waving on the streets and stuff like that. Hey girls, are you okay? I mean, make sure you get home safely. And next thing you know, the neighborhood was working together and the families were open to these kind of things. And that's something we as a church could do. And I did that with all the businesses. I went and got to know the businesses. We prayed for all the businesses. Then if they had a problem with certain things, they would come to me and I might go to the alderman or something like that. That's easier to do in a place like a New York, I think, than maybe as it gets spread out where you're at. But you can do those things too. And then they have their role. You have your role.
Yes. It's the relationship and you all know your place in the relationship.
Exactly.
And so very, very important. Well, yeah, you're right. We were going long.
Sorry.
So not a problem, Greg. Thank you so much. This is I think, very topical, for right now. So really appreciate you and all the work that you're doing with Lutheran Center for Religious Liberty. There's a link in the description here for people to check you out and to help and to get the message out, my friend.
Well, I'm just going to leave you one last thought. If this government's at least benign to us, and that's all, honestly, that's all I really cared about was at least benign. They might be supportive, but I'm not worried about them doing the work. That's now, we've got more freedom to do it. Let's do it.
Yep. Appreciate it. And thank you for joining me, my friend. God's blessings to you.
You too. Thanks, Ed. God bless.
Thank you for joining me today with Greg Seltz on the Reflection Podcast. We're going to have some links in the stream's description in the show notes here, and you'll be able to connect with Greg at the Lutheran Center for Religious Liberty in Washington, D.C., and also have a link to the book that he talked about in our conversation. The Reflection Podcast is part of the ministry of St. Matthew Lutheran Church in Hawthorne Woods, Illinois, where I am one of the pastors here. And if you'd like to know more about St. Matthew, you can go to our website at www.stmatts.net, stmatts.net. I hope that you are subscribed to the podcast. We'd love to hear from you. You can rate us. 5-star ratings are always appreciated. And share this podcast with others. And if you'd like to know more and maybe ask questions, there are links to the podcast where you can get those questions to us via email, and we'd love to hear from you. So check out the other episodes that are available for the Reflection Podcast. I've talked with all kinds of different people, and there are still a few more episodes left in this season. So I'm looking forward to seeing you again next time. God's richest blessings to you.